Have you ever looked at a news headline and wondered, what was that person thinking? How can someone steal from a friend, scam thousands of strangers, or even commit a terrible crime without stopping? Is it pure evil, anger, or is the human mind much more complicated than we imagine? Today we're taking a journey inside the criminal mind, and trust me, the answers are far stranger than most movies make them seem. Here's something surprising. Most criminals don't wake up thinking, "Today, I'm going to become the villain." In their own minds, many believe they have a reason for what they're doing. That doesn't make their actions right, but it helps explain how the human brain can justify almost anything. Think about the last time you promised yourself you'd eat just one more slice of pizza, and somehow that turned into 4 or 5 slices. Our brains are experts at making excuses. Now imagine that same habit being used to justify much bigger decisions. One of the biggest myths is that every criminal is a psychopath. That's simply not true. While some criminals have serious personality disorders, most are ordinary people who made terrible choices, sometimes over and over again, until crime became a habit. The brain loves shortcuts. Instead of carefully thinking through every decision, it often follows whatever feels normal. If someone grows up seeing violence, stealing, or cheating every day, those behaviors can begin to feel acceptable. It doesn't excuse crime, but it helps explain how early experiences shape the way people think. Imagine growing up in a house where every argument ends with someone throwing punches. Years later, solving problems with violence may seem normal because that's what the brain learned from childhood. Another powerful idea is something psychologists call rationalization, which simply means making bad behavior sound reasonable. A thief may tell himself that a huge company won't even notice what's missing. A scammer might believe that if someone falls for the trick, it's their own fault. Someone committing fraud might convince themselves they're only borrowing the money. Notice how responsibility slowly disappears. It's almost like the brain hires a lawyer before the crime even happens. Then there's moral disengagement. Normally, our conscience tells us when something feels wrong, but people can slowly turn down that inner voice. Imagine lowering the volume on your phone until you can't hear notifications anymore. Guilt can work the same way. A small lie becomes easier, then a bigger lie, then stealing, then something even worse. Many serious crimes don't begin with huge decisions. They begin with small ones repeated over time. Greed also plays a major role. Money isn't evil, and everyone wants financial security. But sometimes wanting more becomes an obsession. Imagine someone who already owns 3 perfectly good chairs, but still wants to steal your chair, just because they can't stand the idea of you having something they don't. It sounds funny, but greed often works exactly like that. It's not about needing more. It's about always wanting more. Throughout history, many wealthy people have committed financial crimes despite already having more money than they could ever spend. For some, the excitement of getting away with it became even more addictive than the money itself. Speaking of excitement, some criminals actually chase the thrill. Think about riding a roller coaster. Your heart races, your hands sweat, and your brain fills with excitement. Certain crimes create similar feelings for some people. The planning, the risk, and the possibility of escaping can become addictive. They stop chasing money and start chasing the rush. Of course, not every crime is carefully planned. Some happen in moments of intense anger. We've all said things we later regretted during arguments, but most people calm down before things go too far. When someone has poor self-control or a history of violence, those emotional moments can become incredibly dangerous. Then there are organized criminals who spend weeks, months, or even years planning illegal activities. Ironically, many of them are intelligent, patient, and disciplined. The problem isn't a lack of ability. It's choosing to use those abilities for harmful purposes instead of positive ones. Imagine spending 6 months planning the perfect robbery when you could have spent those same 6 months building a successful business. Same effort, completely different outcome. Another fascinating fact is that many criminals truly believe they'll never get caught. Psychologists call this optimism bias. It's the belief that bad things happen to other people, not to us. You see it everywhere. Someone texts while driving because they think accidents only happen to others. Someone skips studying because they're convinced they'll somehow pass the exam. Now imagine that same mindset applied to crime. They'll never trace me. I've done this before. I'm smarter than everyone else. Overconfidence has ruined countless criminal plans throughout history. Peer pressure also plays a surprisingly powerful role. As children, many of us copied our friends just to fit in. Maybe everyone wore the same shoes or tried the same trends. Now imagine growing up where stealing earns respect instead of criticism. Humans naturally want acceptance, and in the wrong environment, that need can push people toward terrible choices. Here's something many people find shocking. Countless criminals appear completely ordinary. They have jobs, families, neighbors, and people who describe them as quiet and polite. That's because human beings are incredibly complex. Looking innocent and actually being innocent are two very different things. That's why investigators rely on evidence instead of appearances. Empathy also makes a huge difference. Empathy allows us to understand another person's pain. When empathy is strong, hurting someone else feels emotionally painful too. But when empathy becomes weak or is deliberately ignored, harming others becomes much easier. Imagine accidentally stepping on someone's foot. Most people immediately apologize because they recognize another person's discomfort. Now imagine not caring at all. That's a frightening difference. Technology has changed crime as well. Years ago, many crimes required direct contact with victims. Today, someone can scam thousands of strangers from behind a computer screen without ever seeing their faces. That distance makes it easier for some people to ignore the emotional consequences of their actions because the victims become usernames instead of real human beings. But here's the most important thing to remember. There is no single criminal mind. Every criminal has different experiences, different motivations, different personalities, and different reasons behind their actions. Some are driven by greed, some by revenge, some by fear, some by addiction, some by power, and some by desperation. That's why investigators study psychology alongside evidence and science instead of making simple assumptions. Perhaps the biggest lesson is that the difference between a responsible life and a criminal one is often built through small choices, repeated over time. Every honest decision strengthens character. Every act of self-control makes the next good decision easier. Healthy relationships, empathy, strong values, and respect for others become invisible guardrails that keep people away from harmful paths. The criminal mind isn't created overnight, and neither is a responsible one. So the next time you hear about a shocking crime, remember that behind every case is a complicated human story, shaped by choices, emotions, experiences, and psychology. Understanding those factors doesn't excuse criminal behavior, but it helps us understand how it develops and how it might be prevented. The human brain is one of the most powerful things in existence. It can create life-changing inventions, build meaningful relationships, solve impossible problems, and make the world better. Yet it can also convince itself that the wrong path is somehow the right one. That's what makes the criminal mind so fascinating and so important to understand. The greatest power any person has isn't money, strength, or influence. It's the ability to choose the next action wisely, because every decision, no matter how small, quietly shapes the person we eventually become.